lecture with Michael O'Hara. I first met Michael O'Hara in 1998 when I was being introduced to my good friend Laura's new boyfriend for the very first time. As you can all expect, he was the epitome of subtlety and reserve. Or at least as subtle as you can be wearing a vibrant purple sports jacket. Soft-spoken as he was, we eventually coaxed him into the conversation, and he and I have been engaging in dialogue ever since. When faced with the decision of who to ask to present today for this lecture, Michael immediately came to mind. For me, Michael truly exemplifies the ideal of the college professor. And many more agree with me. As a matter of fact, Michael has won multiple awards for his teaching, including the Dean's Teaching Award in the College of Fine Arts and the University's Excellence in Teaching Award, granted to very few people, a few who I see are in this audience today. The root definition of the word professor involves laying claim to and declaring openly. Dr. O'Hara is one who declares openly, and it's one of my favorite of his traits. Michael declares openly when he believes there's been some sort of inequity or injustice. Michael declares openly when he needs to advocate for those who might not have a voice. Michael declares openly when he knows he must stand up for what he believes is right. Today's lecture was inspired by a time when Michael needed to declare openly, in response to a columnist in the Daily News who declared majors in the arts were simply hobby majors. Michael immediately and eloquently responded, arguing the importance of the arts. Today, Dr. O'Hara continues that conversation, and we hope it is a conversation in which you will engage as well. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Michael O'Hara.
Wow, I need to do this more often if I'm going to get an introduction like that. That was cool. So one of the things I tried to figure out what I was going to do when I thought about what I was going to do today was I didn't want to write a speech because I'd already written a column. And so I'm doing something a little new for me in terms of this type of activity. So for those of you who've had me as a teacher, and there are a number of you, it'll more resemble what happens in a classroom than what might happen in my classroom than what might happen at a regular lecture. So without further ado, let us begin. It started on homecoming weekend in October of 2009 when Derek Wilson wrote his regular column in the Daily News, Making Sense. And he declared that making more money is and should be your motivation for attending college. But that wasn't even what really got me going.
But still there never seems to be a single penny left for me. That's too bad.
He argued that we can't afford to be well-rounded when it comes to college, which, you know, speaking as somebody in the arts, not something where you normally train yourself for a job you expect immediately after graduation, caused me some alarm. But even more so, he argued that in every human action, the common denominator is money. I wish I could disagree with him, but part of the process of doing this and preparing for this day has been a grudging respect for Mr. Wilson when he argues this point, as I hope you'll come to agree with me in just a little bit.
In my dreams, I have a plan. If I got me a wealthy man, I wouldn't have to work at all. I'd fool around and have a
I actually had several email exchanges with Mr. Wilson after the whole thing passed through the papers, in which he was having a ball, he reported to me. He was having a great deal of fun pissing people off. But he reports it in his second column a few days later that he's gotten a lot of mostly negative feedback on his article that ran in Saturday's Homecoming edition. And of course, one of the things he was most shocked about was one of my biggest concerns, he says, from the comments is that people see business and money-making as somewhat evil or immoral, which is certainly probably true, that many people do see business that way. Now, I'm not here to argue that it is that way. I'm just saying that his report is probably very accurate. There are a lot of people who view business or money-making as somewhat evil. And I think this complicated relationship that we have with business and money and other things is reflective of deeper tensions in our culture. But for the moment, I will grant him that he was very concerned about that, and he was going to try to win the case that this was not at all what we should be worrying about. Why was I born? So the Daily News stepped in after hundreds of letters and emails and comments to their webpage. The Daily News editorial staff felt obligated to go ahead and try and write an editorial of their own. And their basic argument was the question of asking ourselves why we are here, which they took to be Mr. Wilson's primary motive in writing the column, which was not his primary motive, at least as he reported it to me, was that this is a good question. However, I was deeply troubled that when they wrote that editorial, their main point seemed to be this.
Nice work if you can get it, and you can get it if you try.
That becoming qualified for one of these fields and getting a job there that pays a few thousand or even tens of thousands of dollars more could trump the reasons for choosing the original major. In other words, they were validating the very argument that Mr. Wilson was making, namely that money matters more than anything else, or it could. And so when I read that, that's when I decided that I needed to respond. I mean, I was willing to let the kids handle things on their own up until that point, but when I saw that there was a larger collective voice at work other than just Mr. Wilson, who was writing his own column, whose views did not necessarily represent that of the paper, I was willing to let that go. But when the paper wrote that and was purporting to speak for students in that way, I decided I had to respond. I won't go into too many details. The difference between what my computer thinks it ought to look like and what the projector thinks it ought to look like has stretched it a little bit and makes it hard to read. But basically, I noted that there was something of a conflagration going on and that people were fighting over many things. And rather than try to argue with him about some of the assumptions he's made, I simply tried, my main point was simply this.